Medveđa, Serbia, January 1732. Arnold Paole has been dead for 40 days, but the villagers say he is walking at night, visiting houses, sitting on sleeping people's chests until they cannot breathe, for people have died in the week since his burial. All claimed, before dying, that Arnold came to them in the darkness. The village elder makes a decision. They will dig him up. They will see what has become of Arnold Paole. 40 men gather at the cemetery. A priest is present. The grave is opened, and what they find changes everything. Arnold's body has not decayed. His skin is fresh, almost pink. His hair and nails have grown. There is fresh blood around his mouth, and when they drive a wooden stake through his chest, the corpse groans. Blood pours from the wound. The body rise. The men burn Arnold's remains. Then they dig up the 4 people who died after him. All 4 show the same signs. Fresh bodies, blood, groaning when staked. All are burned. The village believes the vampire outbreak is contained. But 5 years later, it happens again. 17 people die in 3 months. The Austrian military government, which controls Serbia, receives reports. Reports of the dead rising, of corpses that do not decay, of an epidemic of vampirism that reason cannot explain. And this time the empire responds with science. They send military surgeons, doctors trained in the latest medical knowledge. Their orders: investigate these claims, examine the bodies, determine what is actually happening in the Serbian village. What follows is the most thoroughly documented vampire investigation in history. Official military reports, medical examinations, eyewitness testimony from educated observers. Not folklore, not legend. Official documents filed with the Austrian Imperial government. The reports describe bodies exhumed months after burial showing no decay, corpses with fresh blood in their hearts, the dead appearing to breathe when their graves are opened. Clinical observations by trained physicians of phenomena they cannot explain. These documents spread across Europe. They are translated, published, debated in universities and coffee houses. They terrify the educated classes more than any folktale ever did, because these are not stories told by superstitious peasants. These are medical reports filed by military doctors. The vampire panic of 1732 transforms the vampire from regional folklore into a European phenomenon. It is the first vampire panic based on official documentation, and it creates the modern vampire legend we know today. This is not a story about what people believed. This is a story about what educated observers actually reported seeing. And then we will explain what they were really seeing. Because the truth, as always, is stranger than the legend. To understand what happened in Medveđa, we need to understand where it happened and when. Serbia in 1732 is a borderland, caught between the Ottoman Empire to the south and the Austrian Habsburg Empire to the north. The region has been a battlefield for decades. Villages burned, populations displaced, cultures mixing. Orthodox Christian Serbs living under Catholic Austrian military administration. The land itself is harsh, rural, agricultural. Most villagers have never traveled more than 30 kilometers from where they were born. Life expectancy is perhaps 40 years. Disease is common. Death is familiar. But something about death here is different. The Serbian Orthodox tradition has beliefs about the dead that seem strange to Austrian eyes. Beliefs about the unclean dead, bodies that do not rest, souls that cannot leave. The word they use is vampire. It is a Serbian word. The Austrians have no equivalent term. They will borrow this word and spread it across Europe. Serbian folklore holds that certain dead become vampiri. Those who die violently, those who die unbaptized, those who were witches in life, those who were bitten by other vampiri. These bodies do not decay normally. They remain preserved in their graves. And at night they rise. They visit the living. They drain life force or blood. And those they visit sicken and die. The traditional remedy is exhumation. If the body shows signs of vampirism, it must be destroyed. Stacking, beheading, burning. Only then will the attacks stop. To Austrian authorities, This is superstition, barbaric folk practice. They discourage it, but they do not yet forbid it. The region is too recently conquered, the population too unstable. Some local customs are tolerated until 1732, when the number of reported cases becomes impossible to ignore. The Austrian military administration in Belgrade receives reports from Medveđa, not vague rumors, specific claims, names, dates, numbers. 17 people dead in 3 months, all showing the same symptoms before death: weakness, nightmares, claims of visitation by the dead. The local Serbian officials report that exhumations have been performed, that 13 bodies were found in a vampiric state, that these bodies were destroyed according to tradition, that the deaths have stopped. The Austrian authorities face a dilemma. If they dismiss this as superstition, they risk unrest in a recently conquered region. If they accept it as fact, they validate beliefs that contradict everything the Enlightenment stands for. They choose a middle path. They will investigate scientifically with medical professionals. They will examine the evidence, and they will determine what is actually happening. In December 1731, a commission is formed. 5 Austrian military surgeons. Their leader is Glaser, a regimental field surgeon. They are accompanied by junior officers and local officials. Their mission: travel to Medveđa, investigate the vampire reports, and file an official report. What they produce is titled Visum et Repertum, seen and discovered. It is a forensic medical report. Dry, clinical, detailed, and it describes things that should not be possible. The document will be filed in Vienna. It will be copied, circulated among officials. Someone will leak it to the press. It will be translated into French, German, English. It will be debated by Voltaire and Rousseau. It will inspire Dom Augustin Calmet to write his treatise on vampires. It will terrify Europe, because this is not folklore. This is an official government document, signed by military surgeons, describing the dead rising from their graves. Subscribe if you want to know what those doctors actually found and what it really means, because we are about to examine the most famous vampire investigation in history, page by page, body by body. The commission arrives in Medveđa in early January 1732. They have instructions to be thorough, to observe everything, to record everything, to apply medical knowledge to folk claims. The villagers have identified 13 bodies as vampires. The commission decides to exhume and examine all 13, systematically, scientifically, with detailed notes. The first case is Stana, a woman of 20, dead for 90 days. The report describes the exhumation in clinical detail. The body is completely fresh. No signs of decomposition despite 3 months underground in winter. The skin is pink, not pale. The face is not sunken. When they cut into the chest, fresh blood flows. The heart contains liquid blood. The organs appear plump and full. The surgeons are confused. This contradicts their medical training. A body buried 90 days should show advanced decay, especially in a simple grave. But Stana looks like she died yesterday. The second case is Melisa, 60 years old, dead for 90 days. The examination finds the same phenomena. Fresh appearance, pink skin, liquid blood in the heart, and something else. Her stomach is full of recently consumed blood. How did a corpse dead 3 months consume blood? The villagers explain. She was visited by Arnold Paole 5 years ago. She became a vampire then. She has been feeding at night. The blood in her stomach is from her victims. The surgeons record this explanation without comment. They are here to observe, not interpret. Not yet. The examinations continue. 13 bodies exhumed. 12 show the same signs. Fresh appearance despite weeks or months underground. Flexible limbs. Pink skin. Liquid blood. No decay. Only one body, a girl named Stanoika, shows normal decomposition. She has been dead 90 days and looks it. Dried skin. Collapsed features. No blood. The villagers explain. She died before eating vampire-contaminated meat. She was not infected. The Commission notes this. They are building a pattern, trying to find logic in the impossible. But the most disturbing cases are not Paole, a man of 60, dead for 10 weeks. When his chest is opened, the surgeons observe something that shakes them. Fresh blood in the heart chamber. The blood is bright red, not dark and coagulated. And more troubling, when they examine the heart closely, they claim to observe movement, not imagination, not tricks of light. The trained medical observers report what appears to be cardiac motion in a man dead 2.5 months. They struggle to explain it. They note it. They move on. Milo the blacksmith presents another puzzle. Dead for 6 weeks. When exhumed, he appears entirely fresh. When they drive a stake through his chest, performing the traditional vampire killing, the body produces an audible groan. The chest cavity expels air, and blood flows from the wound in quantities the surgeons describe as excessive for a corpse. 12 of 13 bodies show these signs. The 13th shows normal decay. The Commission has a clear pattern, but no explanation. After the examinations, the bodies are beheaded and burned. The ashes are thrown into the river. The graves are blessed and resealed. The traditional remedy is performed, with the Commission as witnesses. They return to Belgrade and file their report. Visum et Repertum, dated January 7, 1732. Signed by all 5 surgeons. The document is extraordinary. It does not claim vampires exist. It does not claim they do not exist. It simply describes what was observed. Fresh bodies that should be decayed. Liquid blood in corpses. Sounds and movements during examination. All recorded in medical terminology. All witnessed by multiple trained observers. The report reaches Vienna. The imperial administration does not know what to do with it, so they file it. Quietly, hoping it will be forgotten. But secrets do not stay secret. Especially secrets this sensational. Within months, copies are circulating. A Leipzig newspaper publishes extracts. The report is translated into French. German universities debate it. The Catholic Church gets involved, trying to determine if vampires are demonic or natural phenomena. The vampire panic of 1732 spreads from a Serbian village to the capitals of Europe, all because military doctors filed an honest report about what they observed. And what they observed terrified them. Because if trained medical professionals could not explain these bodies, what hope did anyone have of understanding what was happening? If this investigation is making your skin crawl with the same discomfort those surgeons felt, leave a like. Because we are about to explain what they were really seeing, and it is somehow both more and less disturbing than vampires. So what were those Austrian military surgeons actually observing? Were the bodies really fresh? Was there really blood? Were the corpses really moving? Yes, probably. All of it. But not for supernatural reasons. Modern forensic science can explain almost everything in the Visum et Repertum. The key is understanding decomposition, which, it turns out, does not follow the neat timeline most people imagine. Bodies do not decay at a standard rate. Decomposition speed depends on dozens of variables. Temperature, soil composition, moisture, bacterial load, burial depth, what the person died of, what they ate before death, whether the body was prepared, whether the coffin is sealed. In winter, in cold Serbian soil, in simple graves, decomposition can be extremely slow. A body buried in January might show minimal decay for months. This is not supernatural preservation. This is cold storage. The fresh skin the surgeons observed was likely skin slip. As decomposition begins, the outer layer of skin loosens and can appear pink and fresh underneath, especially in cold conditions. To an observer unfamiliar with these subtleties, it looks like the corpse is still alive. The hair and nails appearing to grow is another decomposition phenomenon. They do not actually grow. The tissue around them shrinks and recedes, making them appear longer. Every forensic pathologist knows this. But 18th century military surgeons did not. The liquid blood is more complex. Blood coagulates after death. Then, during decomposition, it can liquefy again. The process is called post-mortem fibrinolysis. Enzymes break down clot structures. In certain conditions, you can open a corpse weeks after death and find liquid blood. Dark, not bright red, usually, but liquid. The bright red blood the surgeons describe might be carbon monoxide poisoning, which preserves the red color. Or it might be observer error. People see what they expect to see. If you expect vampire blood to be fresh and red, that is what you report seeing. The blood around the mouth has two explanations. 1. Purge fluid. As bodies decompose, gases build up. These gases can force blood-tinged fluid out of the mouth and nose. It looks like the corpse has been drinking blood. Really, it is internal decomposition products being expelled. 2. Rodent activity. Mice and rats enter graves. They feed on soft tissues. Mouths are easy entry points. Scavenging can create the appearance of blood-stained faces. The full stomach containing blood that Eliza showed, either decomposition products that look like blood, or actual blood from a final meal containing blood sausage, which was common in Serbian diet. Examined months later, partially decomposed, it would look exactly like the corpse had been drinking blood. The groaning sounds when stakes were driven through the chests? This is real and well documented. When you puncture a decomposing body, gases escape. These gases pass through the throat and vocal cords. The sound produced can be remarkably voice-like. Forensic pathologists today know about this. They warn students preparing for their first autopsy. The corpse might groan when you cut it. Do not be alarmed. It is just gas. The apparent breathing one surgeon thought he observed. Likely gases moving in the chest cavity, creating the illusion of chest movement, or imagination. When you expect to see breathing, shadows and decomposition gases can create that impression. The movement in the heart that terrified the surgeons examining Arnold Paole? Possibly maggots. Fly larvae colonize bodies quickly. In the heart chamber, their collective movement can create an appearance of cardiac motion. Alternatively, gases forming in the decomposing heart tissue can create bubbling that looks like motion. Every single observation in the Visum et Repertum can be explained by normal decomposition processes in specific environmental conditions. Cold soil. Winter burial. Bodies examined weeks to months later. Observers trained in medicine but not in forensic pathology, which did not exist yet as a discipline. But there is another factor we need to consider. Confirmation bias. The commission arrived expecting to find something. The villagers had already identified these bodies as vampires. The exhumations had already been performed once. The surgeons knew which bodies were supposed to be vampiric and which were not. When you examine a body expecting to find signs of vampirism, you notice the pink skin. You notice the liquid blood. You notice anything unusual. And you record it. When you examine a body expecting it to be a normal corpse, you see normal decay. Even if that body also has pink underlayers and some liquid blood, you do not focus on it. You record normal decomposition. The 13th body, Stanoika, probably decomposed at a slightly different rate than the others. Maybe she was buried in a different part of the cemetery with different soil. Maybe she died of a disease that affected decomposition. Maybe she was actually more decayed than the others. But the surgeons expected her to be normal. The villagers said she was not a vampire. So the surgeons saw normal decay. They confirmed the villagers' classification. This is not fraud. This is how human observation works. We see what we are primed to see. But here is what makes this case different from other vampire panics. The Austrian surgeons were trying to be objective. They recorded observations in medical terminology. They described what they saw without immediately jumping to supernatural conclusions. They were attempting scientific investigation. They just did not yet know what corpses actually look like under various conditions. Forensic pathology as a scientific discipline would not develop for another century. They were working without the knowledge base that would make these phenomena understandable. So they filed an honest report describing phenomena they could not explain. And that honesty, that unwillingness to dismiss what they saw, is what made the report so terrifying to European readers. If even educated doctors could not explain the vampire corpses, then perhaps vampires were real after all. The Visum et Repertum arrives in Western Europe like a bomb. For centuries, vampires have been regional folklore. Serbian, Romanian, Greek beliefs about the unclean dead. Educated Europeans dismiss these as peasant superstition. Entertainment for Gothic novels. Nothing real. But now there is an official document. Medical testimony. Government investigation. The dead in Serbia are rising from their graves, and Austrian military doctors have confirmed it. The educated classes panic. The first French translation appears in 1732. Within a year, the report is published in multiple languages. Newspapers print excerpts. Pamphlets summarize the findings. Coffee houses debate the implications. Dom Augustin Calmet, a learned Benedictine monk, publishes his treatise on the apparitions of spirits and on vampires in 1746. He takes the Serbian reports seriously. He tries to reconcile them with Christian theology. Can vampires exist if God is omnipotent? Are they demons? Reanimated corpses? Hallucinations? Calmet does not reach a firm conclusion. But the fact that a respected theologian treats the subject seriously legitimizes it. If learned monks are debating vampire theology, then vampires might be real. Voltaire weighs in. He is skeptical. He mocks the vampire panic as superstition. But even his mockery spreads awareness. Everyone is talking about vampires now. The word vampire enters French and English. It becomes fashionable. The medical community is divided. Some doctors try to explain the Serbian observations naturalistically. Others cannot. A few suggest that perhaps vampirism is a disease, an infection that preserves bodies and drives them to attack the living. This medical vampire connection persists. In the 19th century, tuberculosis will be called the vampire disease. Consumption. Because it makes victims pale and causes them to cough blood. And because it spreads through households, making it seem like the dead are draining life from the living. The Serbian vampire panic directly influences Gothic literature. John Polidori's The Vampire in 1819 draws on the medical reports. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla in 1872 uses the Serbian tradition. And Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897 synthesizes decades of vampire literature that all traces back to the 1732 reports. Stoker explicitly sets Dracula in Transylvania, which is close to Serbia. His vampire sleeps in his native soil. He creates other vampires by feeding on them. He must be staked through the heart. All of these elements come from the Serbian tradition that the Visum et Repertum documented. The modern vampire, the one we recognize in movies and books, is directly descended from Arnold Paole and the Medveđa panic. Not from ancient myth. Not from universal human fears. From a specific event in 18th century Serbia that was medically investigated and officially documented. But here is the most fascinating part. The vampire panic of 1732 might have solved a real problem. Just not the problem people thought. The villagers of Medveđa were experiencing an epidemic. 17 people died in 3 months. That is a significant mortality rate for a small village. Something was killing people. Was it vampires? No. Was it infectious disease? Probably. Tuberculosis, typhus, and plague all spread through close contact. In a small village where the sick are cared for by family, disease spreads household to household. The symptoms the dying reported match infection. Weakness, fever, nightmares, difficulty breathing. These are symptoms of respiratory disease, not vampire attack. But the villagers had no germ theory. They did not understand infection. They needed an explanation for why disease clustered in certain families, why it spread from person to person. The vampire explanation made sense in their framework. The dead were infecting the living. Kill the vampiric corpses, break the chain of transmission. And the exhumations probably helped. Not because they destroyed vampires, because they interrupted social clustering. When you declare a vampire outbreak, people change behavior. They avoid the affected households. They sleep in different configurations. They move the sick to separate quarters. These behavioral changes reduce disease transmission. The ritual of exhumation and cremation creates a psychological break. The source of infection is identified and destroyed. Fear decreases. Stress decreases. Immune systems strengthen. The epidemic ends. Not because vampires were killed. Because public health intervention, wrapped in supernatural ritual, changed the transmission dynamics of infection. The Austrian Commission's investigation probably helped too. The official presence, the formal examination, the solemn conclusion, all created a sense that the problem was being handled, that authority was in control, that the outbreak would end. And it did end. Not another vampire panic in Medveđa after 1732. The village returned to normal mortality rates. Was it because the vampires were destroyed? Or because the social disruption caused by the investigation changed disease patterns? Modern epidemiology suggests the latter. But the villagers believe the former. And belief is power. This is the real story of the vampire panic of 1732. Not a story about the supernatural breaking into the natural world. A story about humans trying to make sense of death and disease with the knowledge they had, creating explanations that worked within their framework, and sometimes, accidentally, implementing public health measures that actually helped. The Austrian doctors who investigated were caught between two worlds: the Enlightenment rationalism they were trained in and the folkloric reality they encountered. They tried to be objective. They recorded what they saw, and what they saw they could not explain. We can explain it now. Decomposition, confirmation bias, epidemic disease, social psychology. We have the scientific framework the 18th century surgeons lacked. But that does not diminish their achievement. They investigated. They documented. They filed an honest report even though it challenged their worldview. And in doing so, they created the vampire legend that still haunts us today. Here is what we know for certain about the vampire panic of 1732. Real people died in Medveđa. Real doctors investigated. Real bodies were exhumed. And real observations were recorded that the observers could not explain. The Visum et Repertum is not a fantasy document. It exists in the Austrian state archives. Historians have verified it. The signatures are authentic. The medical terminology is consistent with 18th century practice. This happened. What the document describes can be explained by modern forensic science. Every phenomenon the surgeons observed occurs in normal decomposition under specific conditions. We understand now what they did not then. But here is what makes this story endlessly fascinating: the gap between observation and explanation. The Austrian surgeons saw real phenomena: pink skin, liquid blood, bodies that groaned when staked. These observations were accurate. What they did not have was the framework to interpret them correctly. They were trained in medicine. They understood anatomy. They knew what fresh corpses looked like immediately after death. But they had no experience with decomposition in various environmental conditions. Forensic pathology did not exist yet. So when they saw phenomena they did not expect, they could not explain them. They could have dismissed the villagers' claims without investigating. They could have filed a report saying the locals were superstitious and ignorant. That would have been the easy path, the path that confirmed their cultural superiority. Instead, they investigated. They looked. They recorded what they saw honestly, even though it challenged their understanding, even though it made them look credulous to later generations. This scientific honesty, this willingness to document the unexplainable, is what created the vampire panic. But it is also what eventually led to understanding. Because the Visum et Repertum and similar documents forced European scientists to study decomposition systematically, to understand burial conditions, to develop forensic pathology. The vampire investigations of the 18th century contributed to the development of modern death science. We understand corpses now because people in 1732 did not. They investigated the mystery, recorded what they found, and left documentation for future scientists to explain. The vampire legends those investigations created are cultural artifacts, entertainment, metaphors for disease, sexuality, predation, otherness. Bram Stoker's Dracula is not Arnold Paole. But without Arnold Paole, there might be no Dracula. The modern vampire myth is built on the foundation of real events misunderstood. Serbian folklore about the unclean dead. Real epidemics killing real people. decomposition phenomena that seemed supernatural, medical investigations that could not explain what they documented. All of these elements combined in 1732 to create something new. Not the vampire as ancient myth. The vampire as documented phenomenon. A creature vouched for by military doctors and government officials. A monster that Enlightenment rationality could not dismiss. And once that creature entered European consciousness, it never left. It evolved. It adapted. It became the sophisticated aristocratic vampire of Victorian fiction. The sexy, dangerous vampire of modern cinema. The tragic, romantic vampire of young adult literature. But at the root, underneath all the evolution and adaptation, is Arnold Paole, a Serbian soldier who died in 1726, whose body was exhumed 40 days later and found to be fresh, who became the first medically documented vampire in history. He was not really a vampire. He was a corpse decomposing slowly in cold winter soil, exhibiting normal post-mortem phenomena that the examiners did not understand. But the story we tell about him, the legend that grew from his grave, has haunted human imagination for almost 3 centuries. This is what Primalborne does. We examine the real events behind the legendary creatures, the actual history underneath the myth. Because the truth is always more complex and more interesting than the simplification. Vampires are not real. But the vampire panic of 1732 was real. The fear was real. The deaths were real. The investigations were real. And the gap between what people observed and what they could explain created a legend that will probably outlive all of us. Share this if you love stories where the truth is stranger than fiction. Because the medical investigation that created vampire legends is one of the strangest true stories in history. Welcome to Primalborne, where we prove that reality is always more fascinating than myth. You just have to know where to look.